Astronomers use a total lunar eclipse to study the ozone and find exoplanets. The 1987 supernova may have brought the universe a neutron star. And Starship finally soars and lands in another successful test flight for SpaceX. It's Saturday, August 15, 2020. This is Talkin Science, produced live and uncut. I'm Matt Miller, you're on Trekzone, and we're into day 15 of our August campaign for 2020. Can you help us help Guide Dogs Australia? Beam over to bit.ly/TZ Guide Dogs and donate to our pack now.
With the latest science and space news 5 days a week across Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts and YouTube. This is Talkin Science with Dr. Brad Tucker and Matt Miller.
And so a week, as it inevitably does, draws to a close, and it's time to wrap Talkin Science up with this live and uncut edition. Dr. Brad Tucker is with me, as he is every Saturday, to do it. Brad, happy Saturday.
Yeah, a happy Saturday indeed. Hope a lot less dry, or a lot more dry rather than the rain we had here in Canberra last weekend, where it just bucketed down for the weekend. Oh, look, which is great, but it's hoping for a bit more sunshine today.
Well, it does seem to be a time where the rain only comes at the weekend. It's perfectly fine during the week when you're looking out from your office window, but when it's time to actually hit the open road, more or less with what's going on in the world, but to get out there and explore, maybe even do some gardening, it's just pouring with rain.
It really has been. I don't know. It's like the psychological warfare on the weather now, right now. I don't know what's going on. Well,
people can find you on social media because Science Week is coming up. Dr. Brad Tucker on Facebook, btucker22 on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at Merrimat86, and of course Trekzone's all over social media as well. Brad, let's dive into our live show.
Talking Science headlines.
Brad, headline time, and a couple of good ones this week. First up, Parkes has been inducted into the National Heritage List.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great achievement. It's showing that it's one of the iconic historical institutes or buildings or places in Australia. Mount Stromlo Observatory, where I work, we joined, a couple decades ago. And so obviously there's a limit on just how old you have to be as well to be heritage listed. And so it was a really great remark about an institute and an instrument. And I think it's the first active instrument to still be heritage listed. So it goes a long way of showing just how important it was in the past, but how much it's still doing currently.
Ganymede, Jupiter's huge moon. I think it's the biggest moon in the solar system. If not, it's pretty close. And now it seems to have the largest impact scar in the solar system as well.
Yeah, it's bigger than Mercury. And one of the things that's been apparent is there's been what looks like a large crater on one side of the moon. And some new studies appear to suggest that there's a large crash, probably with something like another moon, to be honest, that created a moon size or half a moon size impact crater, which it's quite interesting because when we look at places or planets that have lots of moons, it resembles more and more like an entire solar system, really chaotic in the beginning, the way the planet and the moons interact and all sorts of things. So it's kind of another step in the direction of understanding how moons form around planets, but also what life or the evolution of those moons is like around those planets.
Talking Science, Stories of the Week.
And Brad, into our stories of the week. First up, Hubble has used last year's total lunar eclipse, the one in January, to study the Earth's atmosphere, which is not only giving us some insight into the Earth's atmosphere, but also exoplanets as well.
Yeah, so this is kind of a cool, neat idea. Now, people have done similar things in the past. It's the first time something like the Hubble Space Telescope was used, because the idea is we want to find signatures of planets that have atmospheres, especially things like the ozone layer. The ozone layer we know is quite critical to the composition of our atmosphere. It's also critical to how life is and survived on the Earth. So we want to find those signatures. And so the big question always is, what are those signatures like? What did those signatures in space look like for other planets around other stars? And the best way to detect the best way to find that signature is to know exactly what it looks like. And the only place we can guarantee has an ozone layer with life is this planet. So it's a really great way of tying something, fairly straightforward and simple into the help in searching for habitable planets in the solar system.
And the way that astronomers did this one is that they used the moon essentially as a mirror. They were studying the reflection of sunlight as it passed through the Earth's atmosphere and then reflected back towards Hubble.
Yeah, you can never look directly at the Earth. The Earth is just way too bright. We're a very bright thing in space. So what you have to do...
Yes, we are.
So you have to look at our shadow, because that's actually what's happening during lunar eclipse, right? A lunar eclipse, the Earth is in between, so to speak, the sun and the moon. The Earth blocks the apparent light from the sun on the moon. We cast a shadow out into space. We cast a big shadow. That shadow goes over the moon. And when the alignment is quite perfect, so to speak, you get a little bit of light skimming the Earth's atmosphere, landing on the moon. So the reason a lunar eclipse is red, or what we call a blood moon, is you're actually seeing a little bit of atmospheric refraction. So essentially you're seeing a little bit of sunrise and a little bit of sunset landing on the moon. So you're finding just a little bit of a way to measure just enough atmosphere on the moon without it being terribly bright. And then you can use it when the moon isn't in the lunar eclipse. So, you can follow the moon going into the lunar eclipse and follow the moon coming out of that shadow. And you can see how the colors, how the composition, how those signatures change, and detect what the signature is of the Earth's atmosphere and ozone layer.
Now, this is the first time that a total lunar eclipse has been captured, not only in ultraviolet wavelengths, but also from a space telescope. Some of these observations have been done from the ground before, but like I said, first time from space, basically.
Yeah, and ultraviolet is key. And in fact, that's what I work on, is we launch these high-altitude balloons that have telescopes on them to look in the ultraviolet, because the ozone layer, which sits between just under 20 kilometers up to about 40 kilometers, just shy of that blocks most of the ultraviolet light. Now, that's good for us here on Earth. We don't get sunburns, therefore, we live. But it means when you want to look at ultraviolet light, you're not seeing a lot of it. So if you're looking at the ultraviolet light, you're going to actually be able to see the signatures of ozone, because if you're looking at the optical, the colors we can see with our eyes, that light's already blocked. And so by looking in space, where we can detect the ultraviolet light, and then we can look for the signatures that absorb or interact with the ultraviolet light the most, and that is the ozone layer. That is the key part of looking at this, and that's why the Hubble Space Telescope was critical.
And it really just gives a calibration for exoplanet research. Knowing what we know about Earth, we can use that as the baseline for when we're studying those exoplanets.
That's exactly right. And so it's a really kind of cool, straightforward way. All right, we find the pattern now in space. We know what this looks like. What variations can we see? It reminds me when I was working on the Kepler Space Telescope on April 1st, one day, there is in one of the field configurations, Earth was going to pass through the field of view. So NASA, we were going to release a statement saying that Earth has found a planet with life. We just didn't know if it was intelligent life. It was April Fool's Day. It's a really cool way of sometimes using space telescopes. And the reason I brought that up is Kepler actually looked at the data from Earth, because what they wanted to see is what planet has a lot of artificial satellites, and does that give off a signature? Earth. We can use Earth as this calibrator for looking for Earth-like things in the universe.
And it's the best planet that we know.
So far, we're pretty conceited, but I think it's justified in this case.
And Brad, next up for our stories of the week, and it's a hot blob, moreover known as Supernova 1987A. So I was just under 1 year old when this thing happened in the Large Magellanic Cloud, and now it seems that a neutron star has formed.
1987A has been, one of the most studied supernova, and this is the thing, my actually main area of research, because it occurred in the Large Magellanic Cloud. So our neighboring galaxies on a dark night here in the southern skies. If you look towards the south, you'll see these two faint fuzzy clouds, and one's called the Large Magellanic Cloud and one the Small Magellanic Cloud. When a supernova went off on February 24th, 1987, it was super bright. It actually sent neutrinos here on Earth, high energy particles. We detected exactly 24. It was so bright that some of the bigger telescopes had a hard time almost staring at it because of how bright it was, because it was this nearby thing. It was visible in smaller telescopes and even to the naked eye if you knew how to look for it. So 1987A has been, a very well-studied object. by being close. It's also a bit weird. It was a bit of a weird explosion compared to the ones that we have. And one of the big questions has always been, in big stars when they explode, which this was, do they leave behind a neutron star or a black hole? We think one of those two is left behind. And how do we find it out, and how do we understand? And again, the more we study the things that are easier, so to speak, closer, bigger, brighter, however you want to call it, the more information we can gain that helps us into the whole understanding of those objects. And so now 87A, it appears that it did in fact leave a neutron star behind in its explosion.
And 1987A, it was the closest observed supernova to Earth since the invention of the telescope. So really makes sense that it's the most studied object. It happened at the right time for us.
I mean, that's right. And it still is. You know, the only closer things we've gotten are in our Milky Way. And the last one of that was in 1604. So we've been waiting a while for this. We've been very patient. So it was exciting that it went off in there. And so, of course, things, all sorts of different telescopes, including the Hubble Space Telescope, which has been used to kind of pinpoint this neutron star, has been used in the follow-up. The Hubble Space Telescope has looked at this object 1 or 2 times every year since its explosion. We've seen how the remnant, or the rest of the explosion, what we call the ejecting shell, and in this case it formed a ring, 2 rings in fact, has been leaving the center or the location of supernova 1987A. We've seen how it's expanded. We've seen all sorts of things. And because supernova are really bright, you have to wait a while for kind of all of the stuff to finish over, right? It's a huge explosion, so it takes a while to get through it. It also takes a while to actually move away from the exact location. And if you want to see what's left over at the location, you sometimes have to wait a while, in this case, a couple decades. And by now having enough clear area around the center of where 1987A occurred, and so therefore where the star actually was located, they were able to pinpoint that it does appear to be that a neutron star is now at that location where the supernova occurred.
Now, the blob itself isn't the neutron star, because neutron stars compress to about 1.4 times the mass of our sun into a sphere. So it's somewhere in there, and more than likely the blob is a giant gas cloud outshining everything around it, and the neutron star is sort of in there somewhere.
Yeah, neutron stars are about the size of a city. They're literally taking a star about our size of our sun, a bit bigger, a bit smaller, squeezing it into something that's only 20 kilometers wide, the size of a city. So these are really dense, really powerful objects. And generally, we've only discovered neutron stars through their radio emission. They sometimes, when we call them pulsars, they spin around super fast on the scale of milliseconds and are beaming out radio light. And so that's kind of how we found neutron stars in the past. So we kind of have to use what's left over. We have to use how the explosions moved, kind of taking a tally of all the energy, right? We've looked at different colors of light, different wavelengths. We can add up what energy is there. We can add up how the explosions happen and detect and calculate that something, as you said, the blob in the center is related to the neutron star, because we're never going to directly see that.
And the question of whether it is a pulsar or just a normal neutron star is something that is the next step in studying this object.
Yeah, because this is another great question. We think neutron stars are created from the explosions of massive stars. So when in their life do they turn into a pulsar, these things? And pulsars are actually quite practical in terms of science things, and they spin so fast, so accurately. They're actually used as a way to independently calibrate GPS clocks. So, that's how fast they're spinning, but that's also how important they are. So this gives us another tool in science to use. So when we can look and monitor the birth of a neutron star, which ultimately this is, seeing how that evolves as well, and see when does it kick onto a neutron star, gives us a whole nother realm of understanding a whole different set of objects in the universe.
You can get social with Trekzone. Australia's unofficial home of Star Trek is everywhere you are. Just search for Trekzone.
And Brad, finally this week, SpaceX has another successful test under its belt, from landing Crew Dragon to flying Starship. This is pretty impressive.
Look, it is, especially when you look at the video and it just looks like a flying grain silo. It's pretty comical in its shape, to be honest. But more importantly, it didn't explode. As we talked about a couple months ago, or maybe about 2 months ago, they were having a bad run with the pressure tests of these Starship prototypes and their propensity to go kaboom on the launch pad. So it was great that not only is that maybe solved, but as you said, they actually got a launch out of it and were able to get about 150 meters height, which is, it's not into space, but it's a baby step.
Absolutely. And not only did it launch and go up 150 meters and sort of hover there for a little bit, it also landed successfully without blowing up. It's something that it took them a long time to do with Falcon.
It really is, right? When we talk about Falcon 9, we talk about how reliable and successful it is, which is fantastic. There is history there. It takes time, it takes perfection, it takes design, and eventually you do get there. And as you said, it was great that the entire thing launch hovering like a grain silo UFO, which is, again, it was really cool, but slightly weird. And then landing successfully, something that, as you said, it took Falcon 9 a while to get. It was great to see that they were able to do that and got it to work.
Now, while I say that SN5 was the first to get off the ground, it's technically not true. Starhopper, which was another Starship prototype, did manage to have a few brief flights in the US summer of 2019. But this is the first grain silo to take flight. Elon Musk tweeted it, after this, that Mars is looking real now.
We do have to say Starhopper had some successes as well, but they're in the engineering, they're in the design phase, they're testing structure, materials, all these little sorts of things. And so in this new version, as you said, of the SN series, it's taken them to 5 to get there. But is Mars tomorrow? No. Is Mars probably next decade? Yeah. If they keep having the successes that they're having now, obviously you want to have multiple things in parallel. You don't put all of your eggs in one basket. You don't just focus on one thing. You try and do a few different things at different steps or different stages. And that's exactly what SN5 represents.
And when it finally gets there and is off to Mars, it's going to be paired with a whole bunch of Raptor engines, 31 of them in fact, to combine the super heavy rocket, which is the Falcon 9 on steroids, I reckon.
Yeah, it's the Arnold Schwarzenegger of rockets. Let's be serious. It will break you. No, as he said, it's putting things together, and so sometimes you have to break up, the testing into the components, right? You don't just do the full system together. You do the testing of the capsule or the main rocket body with the engines, and you put it together in a package, and that's exactly what we're seeing here with where SN5 is.
And the incredible thing with Starship's design is that it's being designed to be powerful enough to get to the moon and even Mars by itself. This is incredible. All it needs is a little boost into our orbit, and then from there it can do everything itself.
That's exactly right. Trying to make sure it's a fully functional vehicle to the moon and to Mars, and obviously to get back from Mars. So it has to be big, it has to be powerful, and it has to be reliable and self-contained. When we see this grain silo, it's the beginning of something, hopefully, that is quite a big success and a big change in the way we explore the solar system.
Thanks, Brad, for another week of looking at the science and space news. Let's do it all again from episode number 438.
There'll be a lot more to come.